We have in this panel our panel expert, Dr. Anil Agrawal sir with us. I request you to please come on the stage, sir. Dr. Meenakshi Ahuja ma'am, to please take the chair. Dr. Madhuri Joshi ma'am. Dr. Sita Lakshmi ma'am. Dr. Dhruv Mishra. Dr. Ajay Singh Raghuvanshi. Dr. Ritu Jain. Dr. Ritu Jain. Dr. Yukti. We have Dr. Yukti. Dr. Rita Bakshi. And Dr. Rajeshwari. And Dr. Purva Sharda would be moderating this panel. Over to you, Dr. Purva.
Thank you, Dr. Pratibha. Uh, Hello, this is Dr. Purva Sharda again, and today I'll be moderating the session. So I have compiled around 10 diseases which mutually the dermatologist as well as the gynecologist we get. And it would be nice to have everybody's point of view because we have a mixed panel of dermatologists and gynecologists. And I would appreciate if everybody in the audience is also actively participating in it. Welcome to all the panelists. And I'll start with my first, and I've put it up in a way that it is mostly clinical based. There is a history, and we'll talk about the questions after that, right? Okay, I'll also start. So, this is case one. So it's a 45-year-old perimenopausal woman presenting with gradually progressive bilateral symmetrical hyperpigmented patches over the cheeks and forehead for 8 months. Lesions are asymptomatic but aggravated on sun exposure. There is a history of irregular menstrual cycles but no itching or scaling. No similar lesions elsewhere. Examination shows well-defined brown macules over the malar areas. So, we all know this is a case of melasma. There's nothing to discuss there. But let's talk about the hormonal influence. What is the role of hormonal fluctuations in melasma, especially in perimenopausal women, and how do these changes impact melanin production? So, anybody from the audience who would like to take the question?
Excuse me, it's supposed to be a reverse panel. So
Reverse,
actually
yes.
we're going to be asking the experts and he's going to be the one
I
answering.
thought it was about the audience.
No,
and,
it is we asking,
Okay.
sir.
First, the question goes to the audience, and then we will come on the experts. So, anybody from the audience who would like to take up this question? What is the role of hormonal fluctuations in melasma, especially in perimenopausal women, and how do these changes impact melanin production?
Hello. I think estrogen has role. So most of the time at perimenopause, because of the irregular bleedings or something, most of the time we give some combination pills, and that may aggravate melasma. That may be one of the reasons. And naturally, UV light, it is always aggravating melasma and pigmentation anyway.
Yes, ma'am. So, anybody else from the audience? Or let's come to the expert. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
So
please.
actually in perimenopause, so what happens is the estrogen starts declining. So when the estrogen starts declining, I agree to what ma'am was saying that, people who are on prolonged treatment with OCPs or with HRT, so there might be an increased melanin production in those patients, and that leads to this. But in perimenopause, so technically if you say, as we've been hearing in this workshop also, so when the estrogen starts coming down, even the epidermal layer of the skin, that would start thinning out. And probably the skin becomes too sensitive also. So even to sun exposure, the sun damage or the phototoxicity, so all that would also really result in melasma, if I'm right, Anil sir.
That's right. So that is as far as causation is concerned.
Yes.
But we can have some opinion on how to treat it also.
Yes, ma'am, please.
I would say,
Can we have the mic, please? Do we have one more?
Hello. I myself had melasma and I was being treated for the melasma for all the modalities of skin. And after menopause, means last, I think 2 years only, suddenly one fine day, one peel I used and uske baad melasma theek ho gaya. And that peel I used for many, like maybe similar peels I used many times, but some other peel I used and the credit went to that peel. But I don't think that peel was responsible. But post-menopausal and after menopause, my melasma finished. So where the estrogen lies, I want to ask.
So,
That's what I wanted to ask.
can
So
I?
tell me one thing, did your lifestyle change after you reached menopause?
Never used also.
Doctor?
Yes.
Did your lifestyle change after you reached
No,
menopause?
I was exercising, I was having good
Earlier
nutrition,
also,
I was
later
happy
also.
always. I was having good sleep. And I was using all peels and razors and everything all the time.
Ma'am, actually, it is the fluctuation in the levels of the estrogen and progesterone which is
Exactly.
stimulating
Also the testosterone,
the melanocytes.
Yes.
So once you become stable, the things can resolve on their own.
So it is a combination, not
Yes,
only
the
estrogen.
fluctuations
That's what
in the
I wanted to
levels.
know
The fluctuations in the levels stimulates
Yes.
the melanocytes.
Yes, yes.
It provides the oxidative stress, and that is the key.
So,
So, ma'am, it is basically the irregular, the fluctuations in
Yes.
your estrogen,
Estrogen
the
and
progesterone,
progesterone.
and also your androgens, the testosterone. So, if the estrogen is spiking and it is coming down, the progesterone is going down, the testosterone, the androgens levels are also going down, but it is the irregularity of all these three which is causing melasma. So, once you probably attained that, when all your hormones were at par with each other, your melasma went away. So, it is that.
On the contrary,
Pregnancy, it is more, in pregnancy, because there's a fluctuation of the time. When that sudden shift of the hormones is what causes, once it reaches a stability, then probably it gets better.
on the contrary to what is Amita ma'am's experience, I would say that melasma of the menopausal age is more difficult to treat and more permanent compared to the younger age.
It is the irregularity in your hormones which is causing melasma. Once everything is again down back, it becomes normal. And also the natural progesterone, which we give in HRTs, which we give in OCPs, the unnatural ones, the artificial ones, they are more, they stimulate progesterone more. So that progesterone also causes melasma.
Also, after menopause, what happens in some patients, because the skin thinning is occurring. So the epidermis is becoming thinner. So the deep melasma will show more. That's why when you said that it increases in some patients after menopause.
Exactly.
Actually,
So
that's
that
the
is the
reason, because the breakage, oxidative stress, everything increases with the aging process.
Right, because of the
If I may,
plus,
I may add to what Dr. Meenakshi was saying. So as we've discussed previously in the morning, there are 3 types of melasma. So if either it is epidermal, it is dermal, or it is mixed. So when it starts in the younger, the perimenopausal age group, so people who is just initiating, it is just epidermal. So probably, a chemical peel would do the job and it would just shed off the skin and it would work. But when it is in the dermal layer, it is more difficult to treat because it is not just on the upper layer of the skin that you can shed off and clear off. And probably that is when you need the energy-based modalities and probably tranexamic acid, if you do it intradermal, I think that would give a better result. What do you say,
I
sir?
think that is the right answer because in the old age we have a cumulative UV damage, and so there is a need of more of the sunscreens in the higher age compared to the younger age. That is it.
Also, I have another question with melasma. We have to talk about UV light.
only want to
How
em-
does
I only want to emphasize a couple of things which
Yes,
are not as frequently emphasized. One is thyroid.
Sir, mine.
Thyroid. Like thyroid is ignored not by you people, but by dermatologists mostly. Then vitamin deficiencies. Vitamin deficiencies are grossly ignored and they are widely prevalent. See, you talk about oxidative stress, you talk about nutritional deficiencies, but how do you assess it? How do you assess deficiencies? The easiest way to assess is hemoglobin, vitamin D, B12, sugar and thyroid. You test for these things. These are the commonest prevalent reasons for oxidative stress and skin laxity, aging. So keep these 5 things in control first, then come to other things. If you are able to manage these 5 things, you will be able to manage most of the nutrition and most of the causes of skin laxity.
Thank you, sir. So let's come to the next question. Most of you have answered about it, but how does UV light contribute to pathogenesis of melasma, and what are the specific mechanisms by which sun exposure aggravates hyperpigmentation? So it is, anybody wants to talk about it?
UV rays are the primary factors. They directly stimulates the melanocytes. Apart from that, they also causes oxidative damage. Long-term UV induced damage leads to collagen degradation. And here is the thing that the melanin sinks down, and thus the dermal melasma appear in the later stages, especially the post-menopausal, and it becomes recalcitrant to treat after the photo damaged. Also, there are other factors which can contribute to hyperpigmentation apart from the sunlight. With the aging skin, the dryness is more common, the xerosis is more common, and hence the photo damage is more aggravated.
Okay, sir.
Apart from UV radiation, blue light also has an effect on melasma.
Blue light, visible light.
The screen,
yes,
the screen.
yes.
Light.
Basically, it is the development of free radicals, I feel. Which
Yes, it upregulates the
ultimately-
development of
yes, and
reactive oxygen
oxidative-
species,
Yes, yes.
which upregulates the NFK beta and AP1 regulatory pathways, which causes the upregulation of TGF beta, which is responsible for increased collagen breakdown and increased synthesis of mature elastin, which is responsible for the laxity part.
Very well said, Dr. Dhruv. So it is the immature elastin and not the mature elastin.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, everybody
Not
talks
the
about
oxalatin
elastin.
one, but the
Yes,
mature elastin.
Yes, yes.
What I have seen in my practice is that around the age of perimenopause, menopause, females do become little metabolically sensitive because of the estrogen deficiency, and they become little complacent also with the use of sunscreen because the regular visible light also increases it.
Okay, ma'am. Yes. Ma'am, would you like to have a word?
I just want to add to what ma'am was saying. Also in the younger, perimenopausal, so when we have fine lines coming, the wrinkling or little sagging of the skin starts, and probably that is the age when women become more aware of their looks because they're done with the family, their kids are settled, everything is all set. And the use of retinoids. So that is also going to make the skin more sensitive to sunlight. So in fact, people who are on retinoid or local retinoids, they have to be more regular with their sunscreen to prevent further skin damage and further pigmentation.
Ma'am, I'd like to add on that. So topical retinoids do cause transient irritation and dryness.
Yes.
But after a while, when your skin acclimatizes to it, retinoid actually triggers dermal thickness.
Yes.
So it, in the long run, is a better molecule.
It is definitely better, but it is making, what I'm talking about UV light, it is making the skin more sensitive to sunlight, and probably that's what we are discussing here.
Initially, ma'am is trying to say is when you start with a retinoid, make sure that the patient is using sunscreen TDS.
Yeah.
What
Yes.
about when patients use chemical peels? Does that
Yes.
also make
So,
their skin
Yes,
more
yes.
sensitive?
Yeah, it makes the skin more sensitive, but like the molecules that we use for chemical peeling, it's imperative that there should be priming of the skin before a chemical peel is done. It shouldn't be the first modality like we'll do a chemical peel, it'll give you instant results, but there have to be, low dosage of glycolic acid or kojic acid based cream applications prior to the chemical peeling to reduce the sensitization, exfoliation, and improve penetration and action.
Yes. Okay. So it is
Induced
basically.
we should not
Yes,
miss.
ma'am.
Drug induced we should not miss. There is polypharmacy in females, metabolically. At this age
Yes,
they may
ma'am.
be on many
Definitely.
medicines.
Yes.
Common medicine like diltiazem and antipsychotic and many others are there. Even antibiotics, especially females. There are many females who are into modeling and all. We have to really, sparfloxacin was one molecule in our time which was really taken out because of this photosensitivity effect.
A lot of drugs also causes photodermatitis and photosensitive skin.
Doxycycline also we use a lot, and it is
Yes.
photosensitive. Minocycline, doxycycline.
So in short, it is the cumulative sun damage, the cumulative UV damage which has happens since day one you're born, and therefore we recommend sunscreen since 6 months of age, and it is just not your perimenopause. So I hope everybody is using their sunscreen. Yes, ma'am. 6 months of age, ma'am. We do have physical sunscreens.
Mike.
Yeah, ma'am, we do have papers. We do have papers in which we do give pediatric population. Yeah, there are people who come for sunscreens for young. 6 months baby. We do have papers on it. Yeah. We do
Now
have.
patient come to skin specialist and mothers, this millennial mother, they are asking skin care regime for the children. That too, 2-3 साल के they are going to play and they are going to school, and for skin care regime they are asking for children.
Ma'am, it doesn't get absorbed. It just forms a layer. It's a physical sunscreen. It doesn't get absorbed. So it just reflects light. It doesn't get absorbed into your skin. It just forms a layer and it gets reflected. We do
Ma'am,
have, ma'am,
actually-
formulations which are pediatric. Okay, let's come to the next question.
Ma'am, actually the sunscreens which are being prescribed to the neonates, like the children above 6 years or 6 months of age, are usually physical sunscreen. These are only the zinc oxide and the iron oxides. So these can be safely prescribed. We are not prescribing the organic sunscreens.
We don't give sunscreens which get absorbed into the system like the chemical sunscreen. Similar is a case of pregnancy. So we do only give
I
physical
think
sunscreen.
we all understand that in Caucasians, they are more prone to skin cancers and all. So definitely children are protected against sunlight even there. So I'm sure they are using more sunscreens there also.
Even Indian population has become aware now. Yes.
See, simplest for children is calamine lotion. Easily available, physical sunscreen doesn't get absorbed, and easily acceptable. So you can start from there.
Okay, coming on to the next question.
There's a lot of echo happening, half the things can't be heard. There's a lot of echo happening. Please see that the sound is okay. I think no one can hear anything. Just deciding कि ये बोल रहे हैं.
Dr. Narendra Malhotra sir is also requested. You can join the panel. You can please join.
Hello, is it better now? Okay, so this is a female 30-year-old woman presenting with recurrent inflammatory papules and pustules over the chin and jawline for 1 year. Lesions flare premenstrually. She has irregular menstrual cycles and mild weight gain. Examination reveals inflammatory acne with post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation over the lower face. So definitely this is a case of acne tarda, or what we called as adult female acne. So my points of discussion would be, what criteria defines adult acne, and at what age does acne qualify as adult as opposed to adolescent acne? Anybody from the audience? To the panel then. Okay.
I think acne above the age of 25 years is usually categorized as adult acne. Opposed to adolescent acne usually occur over the T-zone area, that is the central area.
Have to be little louder because I think
Okay. Ma'am, the adolescent acne or the teenage acne usually occur over the T area, while the adult acne, these usually occur over the U-shaped area. That is, they usually involve the jawline, the chin area, and the lower face. I think that's it. What is the reason behind the adult acne? Okay, the hormonal fluctuations is the main reason behind it. The irregular menstrual cycle, the polycystic ovary syndrome. Yes, definitely. We are the patient may have adult acne if there is hormonal fluctuation, especially the menstrual irregularities is there. If there is hirsutism, metabolic diseases, etc.
So basically,
So
Dhruv,
apart
would you like
from
to- Yes.
hormonal factors, I tend to look for other causes for acne, which are more diet and lifestyle related. So stress is one of the most
Yes,
underrated
definitely.
factors which we need to consider. Psychogenic stress plays a big role. Not just psychogenic stress, but even the physiological stress that we put our bodies through by sitting for long hours, having that mundane sedentary lifestyle, and the like I mentioned, the diet that we take, if it's high glycemic diet or like consists of a lot of heat foods, even they tend to trigger acne a lot. So it's not just sometimes people with normal hormonal cycle or normal hormonal levels without any symptoms of PCOS or hair end syndrome tend to come with recurrent acne, which is persisting throughout their adolescence up till their adulthood. Yeah. So like from their adolescence, like up till the age of 30, 35, I've seen people come up with recurrent acne.
Okay,
And
so
the causes of acne are all endogenous. So
okay, so it's basically the androgens, your stress, your lifestyle, and what you eat, right? So that is what is inflammatory acne in an
I
adult.
just want to add here is that sudden, for all this year around puberty time, and that time she was not having acne, and getting acne around 40, 35, this is the time we should really pick up for the metabolic diseases, do their proper anthropometry, especially abdominal girth, and see for visceral fat, insulin resistance. Hair end syndrome is the most common thing to rule out then, because skin has all superficial manifestation of internal disease that we have to find out.
Definitely, ma'am. Yes.
And also history, since we're talking about adult acne as in perimenopausal, you also have to ask a history. Is she on OCPs or has she got the Mirena inserted? So even those women at times have present with very, very bad acne,
Yes.
which is not related to the other, yeah.
So the other things could be bacterial infections. You have the skin which changes and the dead cells can block the pores. And if it blocks the pores, black and white heads, and if they get infected, then acne can be there. So bacterial infection, and then some are genetically prone to acne also, the comedogenic factors and things like. Then it obviously androgen, excessive sebum production, all that. So it's a multifarious thing, and that's how we have to aim when we treat in multifarious, which I think you'll discuss.
So what about a pustular lesion on the back also? And there are people who have
Adult acne, if we see the reasons, the commonest is PCOD, like the patient you described here. The first thing is PCOD.
Definitely. sir.
Widely prevalent, very common, and causing this kind of acne. Second is what Dr. Malhotra is saying, external reasons. What kind of products you are using? Are they blocking your pores? That is also a very common factor because the use of cosmetics has gone up tremendously in recent times. Plus, of course, there are other factors. Somebody has insulin resistance, somebody does not have a frank PCOD, but the insulin is impaired, somebody has a hypothyroidism. All those factors will impair. But again, I would, even at the cost of being repetitive, I would say always test for vitamin D and B12. They have a huge role in maintaining skin integrity, and they have a huge role in preventing these kinds of complications.
Definitely, sir. Okay. So, coming to the next question, what is the precise role of androgens in the pathophysiology of adult female acne, particularly in cases linked to menstrual irregularities?
Androgens, basically androgens, what they do is they bind to the sebaceous glands, and thus the sebaceous hyperplasia occurs. The follicular keratinization is increased. All these things, the sebaceous hyperplasia leads to increased sebum secretion. These all together leads to the cystic acne and the papular lesions.
So basically, androgens are stimulating your sebaceous gland, and hence sebaceous hyperplasia, more oil, and then follicular keratinization, leading to clogging of your pores. Yeah. So, what treatment would you prefer in such patients? Would it be doxycycline, isotretinoin, or would it be something else like a hormonal therapy?
The treatment usually depend on the type of the acne, especially if the acne are comedogenic. The keratolytic agents will do, the topical agents can alone do the work. If the lesions are cystic or papular, if there is pus formation, then the patient can be put on oral medications, including the tetracycline, especially the doxycycline, combined with the topical retinoids. And if the lesions are nodulocystic, the patient should be put to oral retinoids as well.
Would you put spironolactone as an anti-androgen in this patient?
Sometimes we can put the patient on spironolactone, especially if the acne are accompanied with hirsutism. and there are menstrual irregularities associated with the acne, then I do consider my patient to put on them.
Okay.
And OC pills with drospirenone sometimes, if the fertility, there is need of contraception, then OC pills with drospirenone will also help.
Yes, yes, ma'am. So basically, with teen acne and androgen-based acnes, so the most important difference would be putting the patient on probably spironolactone. That is the, I think, the cornerstone of treatment. Sir, would you like to add something? No. I'll go on to the next case presentation. Yes. Okay, so a 62-year-old postmenopausal woman presenting with generalized itch for 3 months. It is worsened at night and after bathing. There is no primary skin rash. Examination shows dry skin with excoriation marks. There is no icterus or lymphadenopathy. So it's a case of senile pruritus. So my question would be, how do we precisely define senile pruritus? And is it truly a diagnosis of exclusion? At what age threshold should this condition be considered as senile?
So, yes, diagnosis of by exclusion, yes. Senile pruritus is typically defined as pruritus persisting or starting after the age of 65. And it is a diagnosis of exclusion because a lot of causes have to be ruled out. It's not purely idiopathic, hepatic, renal, hematological, and other systemic diseases like diabetes and thyroid have to be ruled out to find a cause for it. And ultimately, it is the dryness which triggers it, which causes a lot of erythematous patches, causes the skin to look like pavement, have pavement stone or porcelain, fissured appearance. There is breakage of capillary which causes bleeding through the dry skin.
So anybody else? Ajay sir.
The senile skin is basically xerotic and dry. That is the most primary and leading cause for senile pruritus. Apart from that, the majority of the patients are on polypharmacy.
Yes,
Like,
medications, yes.
The senile patients are basically taking lot of medications. So these are all things which should be looked for. Although it is labeled as idiopathic, but there is definitely a reason. We will have to find out. As Dhruv had already said, we have to investigate the patient, especially the CBC count for anemic changes, the liver function test, kidney function test, and underlying malignancy should also be ruled out.
Yes, definitely. So entire workup has to be done to
Yes,
find
entire
out
workup should
if
be
there
done.
is any systemic cause, if there is any neurological cause, if there is any psychological cause as well as medications. And there should not be any primary skin lesion, right?
Exactly.
Yes. Anybody else? Okay. Is senile pruritus genuinely idiopathic, or are there frequently unrecognized underlying systemic or dermatological causes we might be overlooking? So I think we spoke about it, yes. So here is another case. It's a 40-year-old perimenopausal woman presenting with gradually progressive thinning of hair over the crown and widening of the central parting for the past year. She reports increased hair fall on washing and combing without patchy hair loss, itching or pain. Menstrual cycles have been irregular for the past 2 years, and there is no family history of similar hair thinning in her mother. There is no history of recent illness, medication, or signs of androgen excess. So this is a case of female pattern hair loss. And let's come to the discussion points. What is the specific role of androgens in FPHL? And do all women diagnosed with FPHL present with elevated androgen levels? Audience? Okay, let's come to the panel.
You need to talk about HRT here. You need to talk HRT when you're talking of female pattern
So,
alopecia.
yes.
You have to have a full hormonal workup.
So we as dermatologists, we would refer you. Yes.
So, okay. So, androgens, female androgens, like when we talk about estrogen and progesterone, both have a protective effect in FPHL because estrogen increases the length of the anagen phase of hair cycle, and progesterone inhibits the 5-alpha reductase activity, which causes the conversion of testosterone into DHT, which is the primary hormone triggering the FPHL. So I think excess estrogen getting converted into testosterone is the reason why FPHL starts. But when we talk about FPHL in all women, I don't think increased androgen levels are responsible. There is also role of oxidative stress, like we discussed
Definitely,
about.
yes.
One more reason for mimicking androgen-mediated FPHL is nutritional loss itself in perimenopausal women. The iron levels are low, ferritin is low, absorption of iron from the gastric mucosa is low. So even that pattern mimics initially as an FPHL, then it becomes diffuse. So this also has to be considered. And androgen is relatively increased in perimenopausal women because of the peripheral conversion of in the fat.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, so let's talk about menopause. Is there a direct relationship between the onset of menopause and the initiation or exacerbation of FPHL? The same thing, yes. So basically, it's again the irregular androgens and the estrogen and progesterone which basically exacerbate the FPHL. Okay, let's move on to the fifth case. So this is a 49-year-old perimenopausal woman. Her presenting complaints are again diffuse hair shedding over the scalp for the last 6 to 12 months, noticeable on washing or combing, without patchy hair loss, itching or pain. So there is a history of gradual thinning and persistent shedding. No preceding acute illness, surgery or major stress. Contributing factors might be dietary insufficiency in irregular meals. There is no irregular menstrual cycles over the past 2 years. And there are no signs of androgen excess, no family history of hair loss, and she denies any recent medication use. So this is a case of telogen effluvium. So how would you define telogen effluvium?
Anyone from the audience want to answer it? No? Okay. So telogen effluvium is basically defined as diffuse alopecia, diffuse non-scarring alopecia. It usually after 2 to 3 years of a major trauma or surgery. It can be stress or it can be drug-induced, post-pregnancy, at childbirth.
So basically, telogen effluvium is a non-scarring diffuse alopecia, and there is an underlying cause for it.
There
Yes.
are multiple causes.
How would you define the?
I want to understand
Yes,
one thing, since we have so many dermatologists here. How much role of hair coloring and all is there? Because when women are aging, we are using more and more of hair color also. So does it have a role in this? And I mean, what can one do? I mean, we are talking about problems, but we are not talking about solutions here.
Ma'am, see, hair fall, anybody presenting with hair fall, there are a lot of reasons for it. First is the blood circulation. So what you eat in a diet, the
that-
nutrition, it can be, as you said, all your B12s, your multivitamins and everything. Then the collagen surrounding the hair follicle, right? That is basically your protein, the oxidative stress, the collagen degeneration, and also the external factors. Like if you have a hair, the external factors, like how much heat are you giving to your hair? Heat can be in the form of straighteners, blow dryers, or it can be even UV light. If you're exposing your hair, like a player who's exposing her hair a lot in the sun, she will have, hair shedding. And also, as you said, the dyes and the parlor treatments.
So those hair straighteners with heat are very bad.
Yes, sir.
They break the hair.
What they say, the metallic are bad, the ceramic can be used.
Anything which is giving heat to the hair is bad.
What about the heat protectors which are coming now before you use color? Bee Blunt and other brands. Moxie is having hair heat protectors.
Ma'am, as you said, it is just happy in the head. There is no sign.
Nothing.
They are not heat protectants. It is giving some kind of heat.
This is very important message to go on, that all the artificial coloring, straightening of hair with those hair straighteners, or curlers with too much of heat, all that is not good for your hair.
So hair dye also has role, what madam
All
asked.
and that could
Yes.
be the reason.
I think all the Muslim women, the hijabi women, they have very nice, beautiful hair because they're also protecting your hair from the UV damage. So I also tell my patients, if you can protect your hair somehow through some kind of a physical, you should do that.
Dandruff? Does that have a role
Dandruff
with hair fall?
infections, yes, definitely. They clog your hair follicles, right? Any kind of sebum excess, dirt, sweat, anything which is causing scalp accumulation is going to damage.
Again, another thing I want to understand
Even
from the
if
dermatologist.
I can just add one point more here, which
Yes,
is of more relevance to us. In today's times, when you have a lot of patients on GLP and GIP-1, it's a known side effect to have hair thinning and hair loss in those patients also. So, you know, if a patient who is on these and coming to you, so you know what is the cause behind that.
And from the menopause point of view, this paroxetine and patients on blood pressure, ACE inhibitors, yeah, anemia. This perimenopausal anemia, we have a guidelines for that. So that is very common.
Ma'am, iron
So-
deficiency,
so-
anything which is
Levels,
less in
if
your
we
blood
correct, yeah, if we
is
have to
a cause
correct
for
it.
hair loss.
Yes.
It can be hemoglobin, B12, D3, TSH,
Vitamin
calcium,
D,
magnesium,
yeah,
it can
we
be
have to-
anything.
Yes.
So what she's saying is we're making the women thinner, but making them bald. Monjaro and all are going to do that. So be careful when you're going to use all that.
Okay, so how would you define acute and chronic? Is there a line that differentiates acute and chronic telogen effluvium?
So acute telogen effluvium occurs when the duration is less than 6 months, and chronic is when it occurs for more than 6 months.
Okay. Any clinical evidence would you would see in an acute or a chronic form?
Pardon?
Any clinically, how can you differentiate between the two forms? If
So
not on the
history comes into play in that. Since when the hair fall has been persisting, what are the triggers that can be causes for it? Like acute chronic stress, acute febrile illness, any underlying malignancies, to any systemic conditions like thyroid, anemias, and all those things. Like those helps us in differentiating in acute and chronic forms.
So I think hair pull test would be more positive
pull
in an
test, yeah.
acute form rather than a chronic.
Yes.
Yes.
of
Okay.
course.
So when you said that the collagen matrix and all creates a problem here, so does actually using collagen in their diet have a role in treating hair fall?
Ma'am, I
and
think
women who are
it's-
using collagen for skin and hair, does it have any role? I want to ask. the
I think Dr.
dermatologist.
Dhruv would be able to answer this question. I would also want to add a few points, but I think collagen is one of those marketing strategies. Collagen is basically protein. Protein gets broken down into amino acids in our gut. Who knows what amount goes to our skin? As a doctor, dermatologist, I don't prefer artificial sources of protein as collagen. I would rather tell the patient to have paneer or non-vegetarian items rather than eating like 150 rupees tablet. So I don't prescribe collagen in my practice.
All this marine collagen and this powders and liquids and whatever. Yeah, we'll come to glutathione also. That's my next
Go ahead.
We should utilize the dermatologists we have in this panel.
So I would like to give a very controversial opinion on that. I personally do not believe in oral collagen supplements at all because they are not activated collagen. Collagen
Exactly.
is produced by fibroblasts. We are just supplementing the patient with peptides,
Exactly.
which are getting broken down in the small intestine. So basically, we're giving amino acids to the patient. So I don't believe that oral supplements. I think it's a marketing gimmick. It's a
It is
pharmacological
just a
scam.
marketing thing, ma'am. And there I've read a few papers now. The hydrolyzed form of collagen has come up, or the marine collagen, but we are still not sure. I would rather tell the patient to have per kg body weight per,
In Delhi, over 25-year-old girls have started using collagen to keep their skin young.
Oral collagen is definitely not well established.
It is not.
In the future, sometime it might get, we don't know. But topical collagen is established. Like
But ma'am, there are
topical
two
collagen-
patients who want collagen. They want, if they're persistent about it, we do right also. But I tell them that, it's not good for you. Matlab, you
For
can rather take
elderly
natural
women,
sources.
like you people emphasize, protein intake is very, very important. Protein intake and vitamin supplement because that is the important cause of hair loss.
Okay, so we finished telogen effluvium. Let's come to progressive signs of aging. So here is again a patient profile of a 52-year-old postmenopausal woman. She's presenting with progressive signs of aging over the past 3 to 5 years, including wrinkling, skin thinning, dryness, hair thinning, and loss of scalp hair volume. The associated symptoms are like she's lost her elasticity, skin enlarged, there are brittleness, slowing of hair growth, fat redistribution, and mild weight gain. The medical history shows that her menstrual cycle ceased 2 years ago, denies major systemic illness, chronic medication use, or significant lifestyle changes. Let's come to the question. What observable signs indicate rapid skin deterioration? What are the clinical markers?
I think you are a better person to answer that question.
Yes?
You are a better person to answer that question. The clinical
I would
signs
add
of
my remarks, sir, but I
accelerated
would also want to
skin
know
aging.
your point of view.
Fine lines, wrinkles, sagging, dry skin, thinned out skin, pigmentation, uneven skin tone, hair thinning, hair fall, patchy baldness. I think I've covered everything.
Okay, perfect. I don't want to add anything.
Also the
So-
age-related pigmentation.
Yes, definitely. Age spots, sunspots, stucco, keratosis, and yeah, definitely because of melanin. Yes, ma'am. I did, my presentation was about this. So how do these conditions influence and accelerate the metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance? How do these conditions influence and accelerate the aging process?
Metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance causes a chronic inflammation. This inflammation is also known as meta-inflammation, leading to the damage. That's what the ideology is. And hence they lead to aging.
Okay.
So the sugar causes glycation of collagen, which
AGs,
stiffens
yes.
it. Dermal collagen becomes stiffened. Also, high glycemic diets increase the reactive oxygen species load, which then triggers the the pro-inflammatory cascade and ultimately causes aging.
So basically, increased insulin leads to the glycation of
Yes.
everything, yes, and therefore accelerated
And makes our
aging.
skin more prone to aging with the addition of UV radiation and other extrinsic factors.
Okay, anybody wants to add anything on this? Or I'll move to the next question. We have hardly 3 minutes left. Okay, so this is, if you can see the picture, this is a case of skin tags and these are DPNs. So this is a 50-year-old woman. She's presenting with small, soft skin-colored papules around her neck, axilla, and the inframammary folds. They are dark, slightly raised papules are also present on her face, consistent with dermatosis papulosa nigra. Symptoms are, these are asymptomatic lesions. There is a history of obesity and insulin resistance. There is no systemic illness or recent medication changes. And her family history is even positive for similar lesions in her mother. So let's come to the questions. So these are basically skin tags. And let's talk about, is there a proven association between skin tags and should we screen patients with excessive probably skin tags for diabetes?
Yes, definitely there is a proven relationship between the skin tags and the insulin resistance. Although all people with skin tags are not diabetic, but the chances of people having diabetes increases with the number of skin tags present on the body, especially the neck area and the inframammary area and the axillary area. So all individuals who visit to the OPD, and if you see visible skin tags, they should be checked with the HbA1c levels, also the liver function test, and serum lipid should be done. Apart from that, we should also check for the obesity, hirsutism, and in cases of females, we should ask about the history of the PCOS and menstrual irregularities. These can also direct towards the signs of insulin resistance and a person being diabetic.
Okay.
See, when we talk of skin tags, we are basically talking of HPV infection. Most often, we are talking of human papilloma virus.
So we're talking about acrocodons here, like because
Anicoderma.
yes, skin
Okay.
tags. Yes,
For
yes,
the
yes.
timing, okay, let me first talk
Yes,
about
yes.
skin tags.
Yes.
So skin tags is mostly HPV.
So there are two things. One is because of the proliferation of the fibroblast, we
Okay,
get
let me talk
skin
about
tags.
HPV first.
Yes,
okay?
yes,
Skin
yes,
tags
yes,
caused by
definitely, sir. HPV, yes. sir.
HPV would mean what? Some immunocompromised status,
Yes,
even if it is only mild, which can happen with insulin resistance, which can happen with hypothyroidism, which can happen with vitamin D deficiency, which can happen with hemoglobin, low hemoglobin, anemia, which can happen with low proteins, and which can happen with B12 deficiency also. So these things need to be emphasized where you can actually prevent it, or when you are treating it, what to advise to the patient additionally to prevent in future. That is what. Some damage will happen due to sun exposure, due to other factors, hormonal factors, which can lead to things like DPN, or which you need to treat. And on those also you need to think of other things. But most commonly, patient will present to you with either warts, plain warts, varicose warts, or skin tags, which are due to HP.
Okay. Ajay, sir, would you like to add something?
Their importance is so much that they are considered as a pre-diabetic marker.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, with acanthosis nigricans, skin tag, obesity, waist circumference, these are all pre-diabetic markers nowadays.
And there are studies which says कि if you pick up in perimenopausal female, you screen their daughters also. And when adolescent girl comes to us with such picture, we screen their mothers, and we find that they do have insulin resistance or pre-diabetes.
Mostly, ma'am, I feel in teenagers who are presenting with skin tags, I think they have all the features of metabolic syndrome. They would have acanthosis, they will have hirsutism. So I think a proper panel for
We
hormones.
have picked up
has to be-
diabetes in mother.
Yes. Okay, so what are the most effective and aesthetically pleasing methods for lesion removal? So what would you prefer, Dr. Ajay, in your practice?
The preferred removal methods for skin tags are RF cauterization, RF
RF.
excision. Also, the excisional methods can be tried. Apart from that, if you are using laser, the CO2 ablation and excision can also be done.
Okay, Dhruv, anything? Do you use cryo?
Yes, cryoablation and TCA ablation or the chemical ablation are also other options.
Okay. Anybody
think
using
so,
cryotherapy for skin tags?
Not particularly for skin tags, but yes, for other indications like keloids.
If the patient has warts, then as
If patient,
ma'am uses cryotherapy. Ma'am, how are your results? Yes. Yeah, yeah. Podovort is, ma'am, only for the mucosal areas. Mucosal areas, not for the skin. With people with genital warts, we give podophyllin, works amazing. Not for skin, ma'am. It's the mucosal warts. It can be also lip or your vagina, or males presenting with warts on their
in fact,
private
it
areas.
has implications in skin tumors also. Sorry? Skin tumors also, because of its proliferative actions, like it has pro-apoptotic action,
Yes.
which has good recovery in topical
Beautiful
for
result, ma'am.
SSCs, SCCs and BCCs.
So these next two questions are mostly towards the gynecologist. Yes, ma'am.
Before we leave the facial this thing, I want to know, I think someone in the audience also wanted to know role of glutathione, oral capsules, the liquid shots, and the IV glutathione. What is the
Dr.
role
Dhruv.
of all of them? What is effective? And
So, IV glutathione is a part of the trend, but like it's not effective for everyone. It's relatively safe if done in a good clinical setting, taken with proper precautions. Although my first advice to the patient is never to go for the IV therapies. I sometimes do go for oral supplements which are relatively safer, but ultimately, yes. Oral supplements are effective if the patient does not have a good liver profile, or the patient has a stressful life, or not a good lifestyle in general. So patients who tend to have more oxidative stress in their livelihoods, it's a good indicator that if glutathione is working, something needs to be changed in their lifestyle, because a person cannot be taking pills throughout their life.
The antioxidant.
So these are
effect
all
of the
antioxidants.
Yes, yes.
And it is not only glutathione, coenzyme Q and all, lycopene, all. I think it would be fair enough to give these patients to reduce the oxidative stress. And that oxidative stress, of course, with lifestyle management. So yes, it works. We still have to have studies to publish and show scientifically how much it works. But I think it's a good option.
Scientifically, it works by detoxifying your body because it's an enzyme which is produced in our liver.
Yes.
See, and traditionally, glutathione IV drips in the beauty segment is relatively newer, but primarily it was used by gastro people for liver protection. So it's always been there. And surprisingly, the whitening, the fairness or the brightening was a side effect of glutathione, which actually, has become a boom of people are using. Regarding what Dr. Meenakshi was asking about the oral tablets, so ma'am, till the patient is on gluta with vitamin C, it works. So the moment they stop it, soon, within a week or 10 days, they'll start seeing dullness of skin. And as very rightly Dr. Dhruv was saying that, you can't be on it totally for all your life. Yeah. So, and I somehow feel that I prefer IV drips in today's time because patient isn't compliant. They want instant result. But nobody wants to take a tablet every day. Ma'am, ek aur tablet roz leni hai. So then the solution is IV drip, easier.
So how per week, one a week or one a month? And do you add
So there are all kinds of things that people are, everybody's practicing. So there are people who call patients weekly drips. So what I do in my practice, I call them every 21 days, 3 weeks. Yeah.
And you add
That's it.
vitamin C and
Yes, sir.
multivitamin with it. So high dose of vitamin C also can be added to the glutathione drip along with a multivitamin, and once a week, once in 2 weeks, once in 3 weeks, whatever you want to follow. But once in 3 weeks is a good idea, I think.
So the actual dose of glutathione is 2400
Yes.
international
So,
units.
and you get
So-
only 600, so actually it
Yeah,
should
if you
be-
want to give 600, you can call the patient every day also. If you want to give 1200, you can call them twice weekly, but the dose has to be 2400.
2400. Agreed.
Yeah. And you can make it a cocktail with vitamin C, zinc, a lot more things, and you can just give it to the patient.
NAC/NAD also.
As Dr. Dhruv was saying, we cannot take it eternally. So change in lifestyle is very important because we take one after another. We have that bad example of Shweta Jariwala. We lost her, that actress. She used to take it very regularly. No, she took all antioxidants.
No, please, this is a very wrong notion and too clear. She did not lose her life because of glutathione. Please, nobody has proven that. It was something which the social media was spreading. It is a wrong message, so please don't take that home.
It was, I think,
No.
a mixture of Ayurvedic medications, probably that, and probably a poor heart.
Yes, you are absolutely right. What I have encountered in my practice is that glutathione is relatively a very safe molecule till date. Like I am widely using it as an antioxidant as well as whenever I have my patients who came to me for the purpose of pigmentation, and the results are really wonderful. About the formulations, we were talking about that which formulation should be prescribed to which patient. This actually comes from patient itself because the US FDA approval is very limited in case of glutathione, when you can use and when you cannot use. So it is available in topical formulations, it is available as tablets, it is available as IV drips. The formulations should be best suited to the patients and it should come from their side. Actually, we should not be the one who should judge about them.
Definitely. And also, it's an expensive molecule.
Because there are patients who are in modeling career, so they usually come and they say, I want drips. So in that case, you cannot deny that, because if you, as a dermatologist, if you will deny that, they will go to someone else, like maybe quacks. I
Keep
don't
your
want to name,
patients
but
also. Yes, definitely.
So what about that actor who had died of glutathione?
Yes, ma'am?
That's what it came in the,
I didn't get your question, ma'am.
all in the newspaper, everywhere it was, she
Who's
died
with
of
that lady
glutathione.
who died,
Actually,
that whatever
she
had
was
a
on some
poor
Ayurvedic
heart,
medications
ma'am,
as
and
well.
then she was also using,
Yes.
and then she also was using a lot of other Ayurvedic medication,
So the-
and then she was
maybe the
starving
culprit
as
is
well. So all of these things combined.
polymedicines, yes.
Just because she was fair, people blamed it on glutathione.
But just one thing we should be careful about when giving glutathione. This should be strictly avoided in patients with cardiovascular diseases.
Definitely.
Yes.
Should we move on to the next question, or should we finish it here?
If it's all now vulval and vaginal, I think everyone is well tuned. All gynecologists are treating these very well. I think we were all more concerned about the skin issues than anything else.
So I would urge all of you to get your skin analyzed there. वो बहुत अच्छा analyzer है, face skin analyzer, and then you can come to us for your glutathione drip.
Okay, thank you so much.